European marinas are completely full right now, packed with more sailboats than they've held in decades. That should be a sign of health, of vibrant sailing culture, of marinas thriving as demand exceeds supply. But something is profoundly wrong with this picture. These boats aren't moving. They're not being sailed. They're not being bought or sold. They're just sitting there taking up space, accumulating fees, slowly transforming from valuable assets into burdens that nobody wants. And the prices, the asking prices on these sailboats have collapsed to levels that would have been unthinkable just 3 years ago. Boats that sold for €200,000 in 2021 are listed at 70,000 and still can't find buyers. Premium European brands with decades of reputation are being offered at 50% discounts, at 60% discounts, and the listings sit untouched for months. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand exactly why European marinas are paradoxically full yet financially stressed, what's driving sailboat prices to historic lows across the continent, which countries and regions are experiencing the most severe collapses, and most critically, what this means for anyone who owns a sailboat in Europe or is considering buying one in what appears to be a once-in-a-lifetime buyer's market. This isn't just about soft pricing or seasonal adjustments. This is about the complete breakdown of the European sailboat market, a crisis that combines demographic shifts, economic pressure, and changing cultural attitudes toward boat ownership into a perfect storm that's destroying wealth for hundreds of thousands of boat owners while creating a glut of inventory that the market cannot absorb. Stay with me, because what's happening in European marinas right now is a warning about the future of recreational sailing everywhere, and the implications go far beyond just prices and availability. Let me start by showing you the scale of what we're dealing with, because until you understand the numbers, you can't grasp how severe this crisis has become. Across major European sailing regions, the Mediterranean coast, the Atlantic seaboard, the North Sea, the Baltic, marina occupancy rates are at or near 100%. That sounds positive until you dig deeper and discover why those marinas are full. They're full of boats that owners can't sell. In France, which has one of the largest recreational sailing populations in Europe, industry data shows that the average time a sailboat remains listed for sale has increased from 67 days in 2019 to over 240 days in 2024. That's not a market, that's a parking lot. Boats are sitting for 8 months or more before finding buyers, if they find buyers at all. Spain's Mediterranean coast, traditionally a hot market for cruising sailboats, has seen listing inventory increase by 73% since 2021, while sales transactions have declined by 41%. More boats for sale, far fewer buyers, and the gap widening every quarter. In Greece, which attracts both local and international sailing enthusiasts, charter companies that normally purchase used boats to expand fleets have stopped buying. The combination of reduced tourism and oversupply means even professional buyers with business justification for purchases are sitting out the market. The United Kingdom, despite Brexit complications and its own unique market dynamics, faces the same problem. British mariners report that 38% of their berths are occupied by boats that have been listed for sale for over 6 months. These aren't boats being actively used by owners enjoying the sailing lifestyle. These are effectively dead inventory taking up space while owners pay monthly fees and hope for buyers who aren't coming. The Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, have their own version of the crisis. Shorter sailing seasons and higher operating costs have always made boat ownership expensive there, but the post-pandemic price collapse has been particularly severe. Boats that commanded premium prices due to perceived Scandinavian quality and craftsmanship are now selling at 30 to 40% below 2020 values when they sell at all. What ties all these regional markets together is a fundamental imbalance between supply and demand that shows no signs of correcting naturally. The supply comes from multiple sources, all flooding the market simultaneously. The primary source is demographic, the same generational shift affecting American sailing. Baby boomers across Europe spent decades building sailing lifestyles, buying boats in their 30s and 40s, upgrading to larger cruisers in their 50s and 60s, planning to sail through retirement. Now they're in their 70s and 80s, and age is forcing them out. They're selling because they physically can't handle boats anymore, because health issues make offshore sailing dangerous, because insurance has become prohibitively expensive or unavailable, because the costs of maintaining boats on fixed retirement incomes have become unsustainable. This generational exit is happening simultaneously across the continent, creating a wave of supply that hits all markets at once. The second source is economic stress. The European economy has faced consecutive shocks: COVID disruption, energy crisis driven by the Ukraine war, persistent inflation affecting discretionary income, interest rate increases making boat loans expensive. Owners who might have held on to boats are being forced to sell by financial pressure. Marina fees across Europe have increased 15 to 30% since 2020. Insurance premiums have skyrocketed, particularly in regions like the Mediterranean, where hurricane-like storms are becoming more common. Maintenance costs have risen as labor and materials get more expensive. For owners already stretched financially, these escalating costs force decisions. The boat has to go, even at a loss. The third source is lifestyle change accelerated by pandemic experience. During COVID lockdowns, many Europeans bought boats thinking they'd provide safe recreation and escape from restrictions. They discovered that boat ownership requires more time, effort, and expertise than they anticipated. The romance of sailing proved less compelling than the reality of maintaining and operating boats. As life normalized, these pandemic buyers became sellers, adding to the inventory glut of barely used boats offered by people who discovered the lifestyle wasn't what they expected. The fourth source, smaller but significant, is the disappearance of the British buyer. Before Brexit, British buyers were major customers for boats throughout Europe, particularly in France and Spain. They'd purchase boats, base them in Mediterranean or Atlantic marinas, and use them for extended cruising. Brexit complications around boat ownership, VAT, movement between countries, and residency requirements have dramatically reduced British buyer participation in European markets. That eliminated a significant source of demand just as supply was increasing from other sources. Now let me show you what's happened to prices, because the collapse has been severe and accelerating. In the 40 to 50-foot sailboat category, which represents the sweet spot for serious cruising and the largest segment of the market, prices have fallen an average of 38% from 2021 peaks across major European markets. But averages obscure the severity for individual boats and brands. Hellberg Rassy, the Swedish manufacturer whose boats have historically held value better than almost any production brand, has seen used boat prices decline 32% for boats in the 10 to 15-year age range. These are boats that were selling for €300,000 in 2021, now struggling to find buyers at €200,000. For brands without Hallberg Rassy's legendary reputation, the decline is steeper. Beneteau and Jeanneau, the French production builders that dominate European sailing, have experienced 40 to 50% value declines on boats from the 2010 to 2020 era. A Beneteau Oceanis 48 that sold new for €275,000 and would have commanded €180,000 used in 2021, now lists for €100,000 and sits unsold. German builders like Bavaria have been hit even harder in some segments, with 45 to 55% declines not uncommon for boats over 10 years old. The reputation for quality construction that once supported resale values provides no protection when the market is flooded and buyers are scarce. The ultra-premium segment, custom and semi-custom boats from builders like Oyster, Amel and Contest, has held up better in percentage terms, but still faces significant price pressure. These boats were always marketed to wealthy buyers, less sensitive to price, But even wealthy buyers have pulled back dramatically. A 70-foot custom aluminum boat that was worth 1.5 million euros in 2021 might be listed at 1.1 million now. A smaller percentage decline, but still a 400,000 euro loss that devastates owners who viewed these boats as safe stores of value. The smaller boat segment, under 35 feet, has experienced less dramatic declines, but for a different reason. These boats were already relatively affordable, and their prices have hit a floor where they simply can't go much lower, while still covering the costs of hauling, transporting, and processing a sale. But lack of dramatic decline doesn't mean demand is strong. These boats are sitting unsold, just like their larger counterparts. What makes the price collapse particularly painful for sellers is that it's not just about lower values. It's about the complete destruction of the resale market as a functional mechanism. In a healthy market, boats are priced based on condition, age, equipment, and reputation. Buyers evaluate offerings, make decisions, and transactions occur at prices reflecting legitimate value assessments. That process has broken down completely. Now, prices are set by desperation. How badly does the seller need to unload the boat before another year of marina fees, insurance, and maintenance costs accumulate? How much loss can they absorb? How long can they afford to wait for a buyer who might never appear? These aren't value-based pricing decisions. These are damage control calculations. The boats themselves haven't changed. A well-maintained Hallberg Rasse 42 is still a superb sailing vessel, capable and seaworthy. But the market no longer cares about capability and seaworthiness when there are hundreds of similar boats available and almost no buyers. The few buyers who do exist have unlimited leverage. They can make offers 30 or 40% below asking prices, knowing that desperate sellers might accept just to escape. They can demand surveys that identify every possible defect, then use those findings to justify even lower offers. They can simply wait, watching listings age week after week, confident that eventually sellers will capitulate to whatever price is offered. This dynamic destroys any attempt to maintain rational pricing. Sellers who list at market-accurate prices watch their boats sit while others slash prices to generate offers. Then they reduce their prices to compete, which establishes new, lower market expectations. The cycle repeats, each reduction dragging the entire market down further. Some sellers try to wait it out, believing the market must eventually recover. They're wrong, and their waiting just ensures they pay more in carrying costs while values continue declining. Others recognize reality quickly and take whatever they can get, accepting devastating losses to free themselves from ongoing expenses. Neither strategy is good, but the second at least limits total damage. Now let me explain why European buyers have disappeared, because understanding the demand collapse is essential to seeing why this isn't a temporary correction. The first factor is economic. Real incomes across much of Europe have stagnated or declined when adjusted for inflation. Housing costs have absorbed larger portions of household budgets. Energy costs spiked dramatically in 2022 and haven't fully normalized. The financial capacity for discretionary spending on expensive hobbies like sailing has contracted for the middle and upper middle class families who traditionally supported the sailing market. The second factor is generational attitudes. Younger Europeans are less interested in ownership generally. They prefer access over assets, experiences over possessions. This shows up across categories: cars, homes, boats. They're all seeing reduced interest from millennials and Gen Z compared to their parents' generation. For boats specifically, the commitment required, the learning curve, the ongoing costs doesn't align with how younger generations want to spend their time and money. The third factor is lifestyle change. Remote work during COVID showed many people that they could live and work differently. Some moved away from expensive cities to areas with lower costs, but also fewer amenities like marinas. Others discovered hobbies and activities that competed with sailing for their limited free time. The assumption that people who learned to sail would naturally progress to boat ownership hasn't held true. The fourth factor is financial awareness. Younger potential buyers are more sophisticated about total cost of ownership. They calculate that buying a €50,000 boat will cost another 8 to 12,000 euros annually in marina fees, insurance, maintenance and operating costs. Over 10 years of ownership, that's 130 to 170,000 euros of total cost for a boat that will have depreciated substantially. They do that math and decide chartering or joining boat clubs makes more financial sense. The fifth factor is regulatory complexity. European boat ownership involves VAT complications, different regulations by country, requirements for licenses and certifications that vary by jurisdiction, environmental restrictions on where boats can go and what they can discharge. For potential buyers evaluating whether the hassle is worth it, increasingly the answer is no. The sixth factor is competition from other discretionary spending. Europeans who might once have bought boats are instead traveling more, investing in second homes in cheaper countries, pursuing expensive hobbies that don't require year-round maintenance, or simply saving and investing rather than buying depreciating assets. All of these factors combine to create a buyer pool that's a fraction of what it was 15 or 20 years ago. And crucially, there's no indication these trends will reverse. The demographic, economic and cultural shifts driving reduced demand appear to be permanent features of the European landscape, not temporary aberration. Now let me address what this means for the sailing industry in Europe, because the implications extend far beyond just boat values. Marinas face a crisis of their own. They're full, which sounds good, but many berth holders are behind on fees, trying to sell boats they can't move, or simply occupying space without generating the ancillary revenue that marinas depend on. Marinas make money not just from berth fees, but from services, repairs, haul-outs, fuel, electricity, amenities. Boats that sit unused generate minimal service revenue. Worse, marinas have waiting lists of people wanting berths, but those people often want berths for smaller, cheaper boats at lower monthly rates. The existing berth holders with larger boats paying premium fees can't sell and vacate, so marinas can't turn over their space to new, active customers. This creates financial stress even when occupancy rates look healthy. Boat builders are suffering. European production builders like Beneteau, Jeanneau, Bavaria and Hans built business models around steady demand, from buyers moving up from smaller boats to larger ones, from older boats to new ones. That progression has broken. The used market glut means potential new boat buyers can acquire capable used boats for fractions of new boat costs. Why buy a new Beneteau Oceanis 46 for €350,000 when a 5-year-old example is available for €175,000? New boat sales have collapsed accordingly. Builders have reduced production, laid off workers, and in some cases face existential threats. The service industry, sailmakers, riggers, marine electricians, mechanics, all the specialized trades supporting sailing face declining business. Fewer new boats mean less installation work. Fewer active sailors mean less maintenance and repair work. Owners trying to sell are deferring maintenance, not investing in upgrades. The entire ecosystem supporting European sailing is contracting. Sailing schools and charter companies face mixed conditions. Charter demand has held up better than ownership demand, which provides some business. But charter companies that normally purchased used boats to expand their fleets have stopped buying, given the glut of available boats and uncertainty about future demand. Schools that feed new sailors into the sport can't convert students into boat owners the way they once did. The cultural impact is perhaps most concerning for the future. Yacht clubs and cruising associations across Europe are aging. The average age of members increases every year as younger people don't join. The marinas and anchorages that were vibrant communities are becoming geriatric populations. The knowledge and skills accumulated over generations of European sailing, the seamanship, the traditions, the culture, are not being passed to successors. When the current generation of sailors ages out completely, much of that heritage disappears with them. Now let me address what this means for different groups of people involved in or considering European sailing. For current owners trying to sell, the message is harsh. Your boat is worth far less than you think, probably less than it will appraise for, possibly less than quality buyers will offer. If you need to sell, price aggressively from the start. Accept that you will take a significant loss. Factor in the carrying costs of keeping an unsold boat, several thousand euros per quarter in most cases, and recognize that those costs might exceed the additional money you'd get by holding out for a better price. If you don't need to sell, consider whether you're actually using and enjoying the boat enough to justify the costs. If not, selling even at a loss might make sense to free up capital and eliminate ongoing expenses. For potential buyers, this appears to be an extraordinary opportunity. Boats are cheaper than they've been in decades relative to their capability and condition. You can acquire vessels that would have cost 200,000 euros a few years ago for 70 or 80,000 now. But understand what you're buying into. You're purchasing an asset with no resale market. When you eventually want to sell, you'll face the same problems current sellers face. The boat is effectively a permanent commitment or a total loss. The ongoing costs of ownership haven't declined proportionally to purchase prices. Marina fees, insurance, maintenance, all remain expensive. Make sure you can sustain those costs long term, because you won't be able to escape through resale, and verify that you actually want the lifestyle. Many pandemic buyers discovered that boat ownership wasn't what they expected. Don't make that same expensive mistake. For the sailing industry, the imperative is to adapt to new realities. The traditional ownership model, buying boats, keeping them for years or decades, upgrading to larger boats over time, is dying. The industry needs to embrace alternative models. Boat clubs, fractional ownership, charter programs, anything that provides access to sailing without requiring full ownership and its attendant costs and commitments. The successful businesses in European sailing over the next decade will be those that make sailing accessible and convenient while minimizing the burdens that are driving people away from ownership. Builders need to rethink their products. The market for large, expensive cruising boats has contracted permanently. There's still demand for smaller, simpler, more affordable boats that can be easily transported and stored. There's demand for boats designed around specific use cases rather than trying to be everything to everyone. Innovation needs to focus on reducing costs and complexity, not adding features that buyers don't value. Looking forward, what does the future of European sailing look like? In the short term, the next 2 to 3 years, conditions will likely worsen before improving. More boats will come to market as aging owners are forced to sell. Prices will continue declining. Marina occupancy will remain high, but with increasing proportions of boats that are trying to sell rather than being actively used. Some marinas will face financial difficulties. Some builders will close or drastically downsize. The service industry will continue contracting. In the medium term, 5 to 10 years, the market might find a new equilibrium at much lower price levels and with dramatically reduced ownership numbers. The European sailing community will be smaller, older on average, and more concentrated among wealthy participants who can afford ownership despite the economics. The boats that couldn't sell will gradually disappear through abandonment, export to developing markets, or scrapping. In the long term, beyond 10 years, European sailing might reinvent itself around different models of access and participation. But it will never return to the scale and vibrancy of the late 20th century, when the baby boom generation was in its prime and middle-class families could afford to own cruising boats. The paradox of European marinas being full while the market collapses captures the dysfunction perfectly. The boats are there, taking up space, but they're not generating the economic activity or the community vitality that healthy sailing requires. They're floating liabilities, not assets. They're problems, not dreams. For hundreds of thousands of European boat owners, the crisis represents wealth destruction and the end of retirement plans built around sailing. For the industry, it represents an existential challenge requiring complete transformation. For European sailing culture, it represents a transition from a broad-based middle-class activity to a niche pursuit for the wealthy. The marinas are full, but there's no joy in that fullness. The boats sit silent. The owners are desperate or absent. The buyers are nowhere to be found. And prices that have hit rock bottom keep falling because there is no floor when supply massively exceeds demand, and the forces driving that imbalance are permanent rather than temporary. This is the new reality of European sailing: full marinas, empty hopes, and prices that reflect the brutal economics of a market in terminal decline. The boats are beautiful, capable, ready for adventure. But in a world where almost nobody wants to buy them and current owners desperately want to sell them, beauty and capability have become meaningless. Value has been destroyed, not through any flaw in the boats themselves, but through the complete breakdown of the market mechanisms that once sustained recreational sailing. That's what full European marinas and rock-bottom prices really mean. That's the crisis unfolding right now across the continent. And that's why anyone involved in European sailing, as owner, buyer, or industry participant, needs to understand that the world has changed fundamentally and permanently. The old assumptions are dead, the old models don't work, and the future, whatever it looks like, will be something completely different from what European sailing has been for the past 50 years.